Hello, welcome back to the Majority Show on this Friday night, which is a little bit unusual for us. This is a special edition of the show so that we can go into the momentous events that happened last night when Labour won the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. I'm the host, Mark Devlin, and I'm here tonight with MaryDevlin and David Griffiths.
Good evening, everyone.
How are you going? So tonight's show is going to be 30 minutes or so, maybe 40, I don't know, maybe less. Just depends where the discussion takes us. And also, Mary, do you have anything particular you'll be talking about tonight?
Well, I think we're all going to be discussing Labour's resounding victory, what it means for the future of the SNP and the drive for independence in Scotland.
And David, what have you got?
Hi, everybody. I'll be looking at the part in which, to which extent tactical voting played in the result last night.
That's your favourite topic. And we'll all be asking what this result means for next year's UK general election.
And of course, we would like to know your thoughts and reactions. So please keep your comments short and succinct, and I'll try to get as many comments up on the screen as I can.
Great. We'll be back in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the show. I forgot to mention that we'll also have Mark Zegvelt, who will be coming on a little bit later to discuss some aspects of the last night's result. Okay, it was the skelp that was heard around the world last night in a stunning result. Labour won the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election with over double the votes of the SNP. Labour candidate Michael Shanks took the Westminster seat with 17,845 votes from Katie Loudon's 8,399 votes. Thomas Kerr, the Conservative candidate, lost his deposit and got less than 5% of the vote with, it says here, 1,000 votes, but it was round about there. The result was a swing of 20.4% from the SNP to Labour.
Well, I thought what was interesting was that what we will call the indie parties, SNP and Greens, got only 29.6% of the vote, whereas the pro-UK parties, Labour, Conservative and Lib Dems, got 66.7% of the vote. That's 2/3.
Yes, well, that puts an end, I think, to some talk of de facto referendum. In fact, as someone said, it was a de facto boot in the balls. So, David...
Right.
Any thoughts or initial thoughts on the result?
Exactly. Many thoughts. First thoughts are, of course, this result was only made possible through tactical voting because as recently as 10:15 last night, Professor Sir John Curtis was telling the world very solemnly that a swing to Labour of anything less than 8 or 9% would only mean a gain of 6 seats if extrapolated into the next election, and that wouldn't change anything. So that was clearly what Mr. Curtis was thinking and hoping. Boy, was he in for a surprise when the true swing was revealed. So, as you said, the SNP vote fell from 23,775 to just over 8,000. And that is an astounding fall, a clear rejection. Conservative vote also falling from 8,000 to 1,100, my God. So, and the Labour vote held up, despite the turnout falling by almost half. So vote share changes of this magnitude are only possible through tactical voting. That is people deciding, I don't want this eventuality, so I'm going to vote this way. And that's what happened. Parties simply do not lose vote share of that magnitude without good reason, and that is very deliberate voting patterns. And that reason is ridding Scotland of the poison of corrosive nationalism, and thank heavens.
Absolutely.
Yes, well, it seems that everyone has ganged up on the SNP to finally perhaps get rid of them. Mary,
I think that's what happened because the Liberal Democrats, they got 895 votes, which was only 3%, and the Scottish Greens got 601 votes, which was only 2%. All the others got either 1% or less. So it very much came down to a Labour versus SNP shootout.
And I should also mention, of course, that Alex Salmond's Alba didn't run at all. I might come back to that a little bit later. But why do you think they didn't run, David, actually? Any thoughts on that?
I think what Salmond was trying to do was to emphasise the fact that only with a pro-nationalist alliance can the forces of independence get the results they need. I think he was hoping that by standing down, he would help to boost the SNP support, and it failed miserably, absolutely miserably. So I think Alba, frankly, is not a significant factor here. I think much as Salmond would like it to be, and much as many of their supporters think that the answer is independence yesterday, frankly, they're not of any great significance at all.
Yeah,
I think they stood down.
I'm going to skip ahead actually to this bit from Wings Over Scotland here. They said, I really hope Labour don't win by 1,500 to 2,000 or so tonight. That's neither Arthur or Martha, whatever that means. Tells us that feck all for independence, SNP need hammered. But, I mean, the question then is, if the SNP is hammered, then, okay, are voters then just going to SNP vote, ex-SNP voters who still want independence going to go to Alba? It seems like, to me, that sounds like we've the best hope for independence has completely failed, so we're going to join Alex Salmond. It doesn't seem right to me. Anyway, so that's my
crazy.
Well, I mean, are they advocating for some kind of new party for independence?
No, they're going to just do it through Alba and do some kind of
So Wings is behind Alba now?
Yes, yeah, they've been behind Alba for some time.
He pretty much is behind Alba, yes, he is. He is not an SNP supporter or voter any longer. He thinks that the current regime is positively anti-independence. So yeah, he's very much pro-Alba right now. And Alba, putting your faith in Alba, Alex Salmond, a totally discredited figure. Well, okay, good luck, guys. But that just shows you that the independence movement is going nowhere. Absolutely nowhere.
Well, one thing we have to say that Nicola Sturgeon has achieved her lifetime goal of uniting Scots. Unfortunately, she's united them all against SNP, basically. So we have this coalition, as it were, of Labour, Tory voters and disillusioned SNP voters all voting against the SNP. Quite a combination, a lethal combination, a lethal cocktail, as you might say. Now, let's go back to the result, and let's have a little clip from Anna Sarwar here.
This is a historic night, and this is a seismic result, and I think Scottish politics has now changed fundamentally. I think the people of Rutherglen and Hambledon West have actually spoken for Scotland in saying that they are sick of two failing, incompetent and chaotic governments, and they are crying out for change, desperate for change, and they can see the vehicle for that change is the Scottish Labour Party. And I think tonight demonstrates that Scotland will lead the way in delivering a UK Labour government.
Do you really think you can read that much into one result in one constituency where the turnout was half of what you generally expect at a general election?
Well, I think it's important to stress that this is not a victory that is 2 months in the making or 6 months in the making. This is years in the making. We have worked tirelessly over the last 2 years to transform the Scottish Labour Party. 2 years ago we were 32 points behind the SNP. We were talking about our survival. 2 years on, to go from 32 points behind to winning a by-election with a swing of over 20%, to get more than double the SNP vote is an extraordinary result. And the transformation that Keir Starmer has made across the UK over the last 3 years is also extraordinary, demonstrating after the worst defeat in our party's history, or at least one of the worst defeats in our party's history, that we can beat the Conservatives and boot them out of office is, I think, a huge statement of progress. But we're not complacent. We've still got work to do. We still have a mountain to climb, and we will not rest for a single day until we deliver that UK-wide Labour government.
Right. Fine. That's just a typical blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, okay, some interesting points there. Labour was a disaster. They had only one MP. Yes, MP. No, they doubled it. So that's probably a good start. Do you think that is... I mean, he talks about Keir Starmer making the party more electable. I mean, that's true to some extent, but maybe more of the problems come from the Tories' general demise. David, what do you think?
Sorry, just repeat the question, Mark. Sorry.
The question is it Labour gaining or is it the Tories losing in that sense?
No, not Tories, SNP.
Or SNP even losing, right? I mean, Labour are kind of picking up the gains from, I suppose, to answer my own question, Labour are picking up the gains from the Tories losing and SNP losing, right?
This is something that
I think that's absolutely true to a huge extent. I mean, we talked about this on Wednesday night. This was, to a certain extent, to a great extent, in fact, a perfect situation for Labour because, as has been established in the past, the crucial issues on doorsteps in this by-election were the cost of living crisis and the NHS. The cost of living crisis is deemed as being down to the Conservative Westminster government, and the NHS in Scotland is entirely down to the SNP Holyrood government, which leaves Labour in the wonderful position of being in opposition in Westminster and not even the party of opposition in Holyrood. So they couldn't really fail. They had 3 hits at both parties, and so they made hay, and fair play to them. So well done. I think their campaign it wasn't exactly an inspiring campaign, Shank's campaign, but it did the job, and they managed to land sufficient blows, and they managed to be sufficiently credible to gain votes from both previously SNP voters and previously Conservative voters, and it's clear that did happen, with probably a little bit of an element of ex-Liberal Democrat voters joining in as well. So fair play to them. So they won it, and they won it substantially because the other parties are poor, rather than the fact that the Labour Party is especially plausible or believable.
Can we expect that the tactical voting would continue into the general election? Is that a realistic thing to think that might happen?
I think that's the key question for me. I mean, you know what a fan of tactical voting I am. Remember that the parties will try to avoid it. They'll oppose it effectively, because neither party, neither the Labour Party nor the Conservative Party will ever tell their voters to vote for somebody else. They won't do it, really, because they have party machineries to support. And I totally understand that. It's naivety to think that they would. But the crucial question is to what extent voters will embrace the real question is to what extent will Labour voters be prepared to give their votes to Conservative candidates? That's the question.
Well, we know that's not really going to be much of the case. That's traditionally, Conservatives are much more likely to tactical vote because they're more opposed to the SNP, perhaps, than Labour. But the main seats that the Tories are contesting, Tories versus, there's a bunch of Tories, especially in the North, Tory seats versus the SNP. I don't know if tactical voting is really even necessary for those. But you're producing a guide, though, right, that will tell us all the ins and outs of all this.
Yeah, exactly right. And so this is something I've talked about quite a few times on the show and on social media, and it will be publicised probably next week. And the point of this is to say, if there were to be a general election tomorrow, what is the best way for people in Scotland who are anti-independence and anti-SNP and pro-UK to vote? Which party should get their support? Now, it's been worked out on the basis of taking every one of the 57 constituencies and saying, OK, in this constituency, which party is best placed to mount a serious challenge to the SNP so that they might win, given at least some element of tactical voting, which party is best placed to win? And that's been worked out across the board, all 57 seats, and it's been discussed to an extent with all 3 of the major pro-UK parties, each one of whom, and at various levels of seniority, have said, "Yep, okay, I'd go along with that." And some of the people who have discussed this in the pro-UK parties are very, very senior indeed, and they've said, "Okay, yeah, this is great. We wouldn't oppose this." And so that's what we're doing. Now, they won't say officially, "Yes, okay, we back this," but the crucial thing is to have voters backing it. And my honest opinion is, if it's embraced and if it's endorsed by people and if voters follow it, the pro-UK parties can win at the very least 40 seats, and I believe that firmly. And so imagine if we could do that, take the SNP share of the vote of the seats in Scotland down from 48 to say 17. That would be the end of Scottish nationalism as a credible force and as the idea of independence.
I do think that this election shows that tactical voting is possible. And that's quite interesting. It also shows, I think, that for Labour, not for Labour, for a disillusioned SNP, that there is a path back to Labour. So there are these big messages that come out of this thing for the Conservative voter or tactical voters. Tactical voting works great. And as I said, for just people, you saw all those vox pops, people in Rutherglen and Hamilton, Blantyre, wherever, saying, they're just, all these parties are all just the same. Well, okay. Whereas a year ago, they would have been saying, the SNP are different from all the other parties, right? So there's a lot of disillusionment with the SNP, but people are like to say, I've said this many times, people will say, I'm politically homeless, right? And they say that for a while until they go into the ballot box and say, I really don't want to have the Tories in power in Westminster. So, but there needs to be a process for that. So this is step one in that process.
Sorry, Elizabeth Duthie was asking, how will you get this out to the general public, though, David? So, I know that one of the ways we're going to do it is we're going to publish it on the majority for a start, and we will be promoting this tactical voting guide.
Exactly.
But I think to some extent you have to have faith in the voters themselves. The voters understand these things, and if they're given permission to do it, that's the thing, and that's what this election does. It gives them permission to tactically vote, because the objective is so powerful. The objective is these people must not have any more power. That's the simple. They must be removed from power.
Absolutely
under any circumstances. That's it.
Indeed. Exactly right. And there are people who say, and there's people in the messages now saying I can't vote Labour. Okay, I understand some people feel that way, but the crucial thing, the whole sole purpose of the tactical voting guide is to identify the party at this stage, because we only know the party, we know very few candidates, the party which is best placed to beat the SNP, and that's all this is about. This is not about ensuring that Keir Starmer doesn't become Prime Minister. We can't really affect that to any great extent at all, and we're not going to try to. We're all about the Scottish political scene and defeating the SNP. This is an anti-nationalist platform. This is what we do. We are all about identifying the best way to beat the SNP in every single constituency. And you've seen how successful that can be last night. We extrapolate that across the other 57 constituencies. We won't have a problem with the SNP anymore. Who happens to be the Prime Minister, that is of secondary importance to us. That's not what we're all about. We're all about defeating the SNP.
Because once we defeat the SNP and defeat nationalism, then we can return to two-party or multi-party politics. The SNP, I'm going to say it's a kind of cancer that takes over normal politics and feeds people. It feeds a certain type of thing. A person today said to me, "I'll never vote, for a unionist party." So what are you going to do? Are you going to wait for 20 years for a dream that's not going to happen? While charlatans who basically promise you, unicorns and rainbows, are allowed to get away with their incompetence, their grift, and their groping. So you can't. That's not a mature way to deal with politics. And you can. I think you can have an indulgence, right? For a while, you can say I can have an infatuation with a particular ism or an ideology, but at a certain point, you've got real world problems. We have to deal with these real world issues in front of our face. It's all well and good saying I'm going to run away to a new country and whatever in the dream world, but in reality, people need help with actual real issues, and that's what I think this election came down to.
Exactly right. And
Go ahead, David.
Quite, I agree. And thankfully now people in Scotland are realising, the answer to a minor political issue is not, let's form a new country. That's ridiculous. I just wanted to pick up on a point here made by Andrew White, where he's saying the second placed party to the SNP should be given a chance to win. Andrew, with great respect, I understand the point, but it's not just as simple as taking the second placed party from the last election for one reason in particular, and that is the last election, 2019, was to a great extent skewed and distorted by the presence of one figure, and that is Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour leader. His presence as Labour leader distorted the Conservative vote by inflating it, and it distorted the Labour vote by depressing it. You have to take that into account. You cannot just take the second place party from 4 years ago, because the landscape has moved on massively. This is why the tactical voting guide exists. It would be very easy to say, let's just pick it would be a massive mistake. What we need to do is look at the party which is best placed to win the seat, not just come second. Coming second's no good in a first past the post elect. Doesn't help at all. Coming a strong SNP doesn't help anybody except the SNP. You've got to identify the party which can win the seat, and that means at the next election, the party which can win most seats in Scotland, i.e. 3 times more than any other party, is the Labour Party. So whether you like them or not, that's how you beat the SNP. There are other seats when where the Conservatives are best placed to win, and other seats when the Dems are best placed to win. But the majority of seats in Scotland can only be won from the SNP by Labour, and that's an absolute fact, regardless in the 2019 election when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and you have to take that into account.
Right, I'm going to take a very brief break, and we're going to come back with Mark Zegvelt, and we're going to talk about reactions to the vote around. So back in a second. Right, Mark, hello, how are you?
Good evening. How are you all doing?
We're doing all right, actually.
How are you? Oh, you're there.
We're all happy. I think many Conservatives perhaps are happy that Labour won in this case because it has deeper meaning deeper meaning. Anyway, so brought you on to let's have a little chat about the reactions here. First of all, so of course, we saw Anna Sarwar there, who's very happy, of course. And then we're going to talk about Humza Yousaf and his reaction to it here. I'll put this on.
I think anybody who extrapolates a turnout of 37% in a by-election into a general election is probably doing themselves and the electorate a disservice. What I would say is we have had adversity in the past. We've lost by-elections, I'm afraid, in the past, and then we've come back stronger. And the SNP has often proven people wrong. People told me when I'd first joined the party, the SNP would never be in government in Holyrood. We've been in government. They told us we never win a majority. We won a majority. They told us we never have a referendum. We had a referendum. They said you'll never win 4 terms. We won 4 terms. So when people write us off,
so did you say we won a referendum?
When we are at our strongest, so we will bounce back. So I think clearly what people have done and said to us is Margaret Ferrier's actions were reckless. That's come across on the doorsteps time and time again. And of course, as I say, I can't escape the fact that the police investigation has been very damaging for the party. In terms of my own position, I've got a job to lead from the front. I will do that. That's what party members have asked me
God help them.
to make sure the party reflects that we regroup and we reorganise. So we're a fighting campaign machine in order to make sure we're in a good place come the general election.
Right, Mark, any thoughts on that?
I find it really, really interesting, the reaction from Humza and others. It's the bingo card of excuses.
Right. Okay.
It's, you tick off the excuse. It was this, it was that, it was the other. But what they're not doing is they're not listening to their own voters. And that for a party, in my view, is really, really dangerous. If you don't listen and you don't react and you just come up with excuses, then that's going to happen in the general election. The vote will be the same. In my view, I think they're making, and I'm pretty pleased about it, they're making a serious mistake in just saying, well, I've heard so many times today, it was a one-off, it's an outlier, it doesn't really matter. It's just one seat. John Curtis said last night, that thinking is dangerous, because you can't go backwards and say, well, it's only just one seat, because that will permutate into different seats. And if the SNP supporters don't hear what they want to hear from Humza and from the others, that they are listening to them.
But then he's in a bind then, right? Because basically the SNP, disillusioned SNP people want to more focus on independence, right? They want more. They want a date. They want action, but they can't do any action. He's stuck. So, and in fact, and if he does say that, then his opponents will just say, well, you're living in cloud cuckoo land.
But I don't think it's just about independence. I don't think it's just about independence. I think it's about other things. I think it's about the Greens being in coalition with the Greens. I think it's the policies that they've been coming out with. I think it's the GRR bill. I think it's a lot of issues that people are telling them, we don't like what you've done.
Yes.
And Humza's not listening to that. He's not saying, I'm going to go back and look at these because you've told us quite strongly last night that you're not happy.
Well, the thing is, they're not happy with
saying
so many different parts. Mary, go ahead.
So Alan Jack has said the SNP have now lost 13 out of the last 14 trips to the ballot box in by-elections. Is that true, guys?
Well, I think it's quite a lot of council by-elections, certainly. And it's definitely...
So that would show that they're not learning anything, which is what you're saying, Mark.
Well, it's a council by-election is not really...
But 13 out of 14.
Local, but yes, but this is always going to be the big one. The by-election, major by-election like this is going to be the thing. We said in the last show, there's a year of negative headlines that are going to be expressed in this by-election. People are going to say, this is what the result is. This is what's happened. And that includes all the things Mark said there, the GRR, bottle deposit scheme, minimum unit pricing, ferries. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Arrests, camper vans. I mean, every day a more and more negative headline. To think that wouldn't be reflected in the polls, and for Humza, you have to say, "Oh well, we won't extrapolate this." That's not. It's not like this is a one-off event. This is an amazing decline because of all these negative headlines that they cannot get out of. It might even be worse in the next by-election. Mark, so you've been looking at any other followers and anything else that they've been talking about?
Yeah, it's just I think when I'm getting from the SNP followers that are on Twitter and that I'm getting the same kind of burying the head in the sand. It's only one result. Don't think we're finished yet, or we can survive this. It doesn't really matter, and a lot of excuses. But I do think if they don't start listening and it carries on as it is, come the general election, the SNP support won't come out.
No,
they'll stay at home like they did at Rutherglen. I said 37% turnout. Well, Labour got their supporters out.
Yes.
Labour supporters came out. It was the SNP supporters that stayed at home. Now, if that carries on during the election, general election, because they're not hearing, they're not being listened to, I think that will carry on into other constituencies as well.
What can they, David? Have you any thoughts on what the SNP can actually do to save the situation?
I genuinely don't see it. In the same way that I don't see how the Conservative Party throughout the UK can arrest their decline in the next year. And remember, the next election has to be called in the next just over a year. Similarly, I don't see how the SNP can either, particularly, as you've said, Mark, SNP voters who came across to the SNP from Labour, anyways, we all know, now have a reason and a mechanism to go back to Labour, which is because they back the idea of the Labour Party becoming the next party of government. What on earth is going to induce those same people who've gone Labour, SNP, back to Labour? Why on earth would they go back to the SNP in the next year? For what reason? What could the SNP possibly say or do which would encourage all their voters who have said enough to go back to them? There is nothing. They have no mechanism. And a journalist, a very senior political editor, said today, the problem that the SNP has is there is no path to a referendum, which is something we've said on the show for about a year.
and before that, yes. Actually, I was thinking about this today. There's not just there's no path to a referendum, which is what we always used to say. There's no vehicle now for it as well. There used to be a vehicle. There used to be a vehicle that could go in the path, so to speak. But now there's no vehicle.
Yeah, true. And now there's nothing. So I really don't see it. I don't think you get. I mean, I've always said the pace of change in Scotland is glacial. It takes as long as it does for a glacier to melt. Not quite. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's taken 16 years for people who were voting Labour and then went to the SNP to think, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. What they're not going to do is change their minds in the next 9 months. That will not happen. So this, we really are. We've seen the beginning. We've seen the tipping point has happened, and it's only going to go on. And nothing. The answer is, what can the SNP do? And they changed leaders, so what? It's just a different driver. Different driver in the seat of a runaway train means absolutely still going to hit the buffers either way, guys. So what can you do, SNP? Nothing. All you can do is to be truthful, back Labour, leave the SNP behind, end Scotland's disastrous flirtation with toxic nationalism, and get behind the party that's actually going to win, and then stop all this nonsense about we never get the party we vote for. Vote for the party that's going to win. There you go. That's how you
vote for the party. Vote for the party you want to win. Well, is it really any surprise that a party that was started, 80 or 90 years ago by Anglophobes and Nazi sympathisers would ever really get the power it has? And this is a thing that people have to come to terms with. I think over the next as the SNP declines, it's like how on earth did you let this happen?
Well, I think a lot of the party insiders are now in fear because aren't they having their SNP conference next weekend?
Oh, really? Okay, yes. That's
yes.
Right, yes.
And they're seriously worried about getting trounced at next year's general election.
Well, I was trying to think of all the different words that we could use. Skelped, trounced, beaten, slapped, stood upon, whatever. Anyway, many of those
smashed.
Yes, type of words. Yes, and of course, I mean, okay, we can all be happy and all that, but there is still work to do. Now, you mentioned there the Stephen Flynn was saying, maybe somebody with Stephen Flynn or the people.
Well, Stephen Flynn, the party's Westminster leader, he was urging Humza Yousaf not to downplay the significance of the defeat by saying, well, it's not that important, and not to blame it entirely on factors outside of his control. In other words, to take some share of the responsibility.
Oh, okay. Well, that seems a bit.
I haven't seen much evidence of that happening.
Well, it's all the Westminster group that, of course, stand to lose their seats. George Folk was saying that Stephen Flynn was on manoeuvres earlier on today as well.
What does that mean? On
it means that they're angling to get power to oust the leader, probably.
Yeah.
That's really
I've actually heard that today.
Yes.
There's been a couple of sources that have actually said that there is behind the scenes rumblings of trying to maybe have a run at Humza at some time.
Yeah, I'm convinced that will happen. I mean, we all know that Kate Forbes is positioning herself for a tilt at the job. We were talking about this earlier today. It's difficult to see any way in which Humza could be ousted before the next general election. I think he'll get a stab at the next general election because, as I said earlier today, we all know how the SNP is with votes of no confidence. I mean, they've voted down votes of no confidence in John Swinney twice, and Lorna Slater is not even in their party. So I mean, there's no way they're going to vote down their own leader.
And they're not going to break the agreement as well. No, Butte House agreement.
Not at all. But however, what they will do is they'll give him until the next Westminster general election. After that, if that is a wipeout, then he is absolutely toast.
Yes, but then the damage is done. Right,
exactly. Yes,
and it's up to Labour to stick the knife in. Now that's going to be a different question altogether. Right. Okay. So we're up at about 30 odd minutes. Probably another 10 minutes maybe to go of discussion. If you with us so far, please. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for all your comments as well. To all of you who enjoy the show. But not regular donors. We don't really need your help to keep the show going. We do have monthly costs for software and so on, equipment. And you can donate for just £2 a month or make a one-time donation. Everything helps in our fight against toxic nationalism. Okay, so I'll give us a wee rest and we'll be back in just a few seconds. Okay, so what we've got, let's talk about, there was a thing about voter ID. Did you talk about that, Mark? Was there any discussion?
The voter ID?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some, I think there's been a few nationalist people on Twitter today saying that there was quite a few problems with voter ID not turning up and not having the right ID and then being sent away, but I just think that's I've not heard anything official from any of the parties about it. So
yeah,
I just think it's a little bit of excuse making again.
Yeah,
or
it's a bit of it's a hot button issue in the United States, voter ID. But I don't think it's really that important here. Most people you feel a bit more sensible here that people should have an ID anyway. And if their supporters don't have the capacity to bring ID to the voting booth, then it really is the kind of people you want voting for you. And actually, someone else made a good point about this, that it means. Doesn't it mean that in the previous elections you're admitting that people may have voted multiple times? right? If you're so anyway, whatever. Okay, so voting ID isn't that great. Thomas Kerr. Mary, you got some thoughts on Thomas?
Well, I don't know why Thomas was running. I mean, Thomas, by all accounts, is a very intelligent and very capable person, and I think he deserved a lot better than being put up for this. People like him, and I think he's a great representative of Conservatives. But really, this was just a two-party shootout on this one.
Yep.
So I really don't think Thomas should have been running, and it's a shame that he got such a bad result. I mean, it's good in the sense that I think this is where the pro-UK side were tactically voting.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who perhaps would have voted Conservative lent their votes to Labour just to get the SNP out, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a shame for Thomas that he had to be the.
He also came off best
that.
In the debate, such as it was a little debate.
Yeah, he's very capable.
Yes. So perhaps he can come back in another seat.
I think the Conservatives. I just don't think that was a good strategy. I think it was ill thought out because it's not
start
good
with the Scottish Conservatives and strategy, for God's sake, all night.
Oh, don't exactly. I mean, my view on Thomas is very capable, a nice guy, very capable guy. I think he would tell you himself privately he's almost certainly better suited to Holyrood than to Westminster, in as much as he was never going to win this seat, and there's very little point in standing in a first past the post election if you don't think you're going to win it. So he will. I'm sure he will be a figure in Holyrood rather than in Westminster, unless he's given a safe seat. But how many safe seats do the Conservatives have, really? So I can understand to an extent, but as we said, he's a quality candidate. So why put him in? For what reason? He's only going to lose, and he did. So
and it makes him look bad.
But good luck to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can explain it away in terms of tactical voting, but it's a discussion you don't really need to have in your resume. But tactical voting.
Yeah,
he took one for the team.
Well, okay, maybe that's true. But
he took one for the team. And on the subject of losing candidates, as Catherine said here, a shout out to Niall Fraser, who ran an excellent campaign. He did very well. He's our friend. He's a huge supporter of the majority. He's a very nice guy, and he did well. He got his profile up, and he composed himself wonderfully throughout, despite some very unpleasant coverage. So well done, Niall, pal. Well done.
Also, I was going to say, the Greens didn't do very well, did they? I mean, I think, but it's kind of typical for the Greens. They only get a few hundred or hundreds of votes, but they've got so much power.
Exactly, the Greens are exactly. They're not a power. They're not a consideration in first past the post elections because they can pretty much guarantee 2% of the vote. Wow, that's a little more than Niall got. Well done. So
they shouldn't be in have any position of power in government. Okay, going to talk a little bit about the commentary last night, and then we're going to wrap up with what does it mean going forward. So we all watched. Well, I don't know what you were watching, but I started watching STV and then watched BBC. I should have probably gone back to the STV. I think first thing to note was this weird thing actually on the BBC where they showed Philip Sim, I think, showed this map of the 2019 general elections. Perhaps you can't see it on the screen there, but it didn't show any of the constituencies that the Tories have in the borders.
Yeah,
it's very weird. So,
weird indeed. Yeah, should be a lot more blue on that page, is right?
Yeah, there should be at least 3 big blue ones right along the border there, no? Because you've got Alistair Jack for a start.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I know.
He's down there. And there's another 2 big names down there as well.
And some stuff up in the northeast. Yeah, that's not representative in the slightest.
And we had this classic moment from Lesley Riddoch here.
It's just to say, I mean, I'm not at all sure that we've kind of got to a point that this is a seismic night for Labour.
We get to that point.
The result comes through, there's really a long road to go to get to the stage where independent supporters like me, who have voted Labour all my life until about 2007, are going to seriously consider the Labour Party. And, on very just big core democratic issues, the reason that many people may be turning from the SNP is because both your mainstream parties have denied the Scots the right to self-determination. Now, that doesn't seem to me such...
Which is through self-determination.
Can't really? So you've decided that. That's as far as we go. Who are you, John?
I'm actually John Lieutenant, and
I
I'm
do
right.
realise that. Oh, right, okay. Lovely. So you see, that's exactly the kind of arrogance of not allowing the Scottish public to decide for themselves. It's not what might be at play tonight. But the issue is that many independent supporters now feel hopeless. And well done.
Well, they do feel hopeless. Anyway, okay, so, all right. Mary is saying that she needs to wrap up because she's got another thing to do. But I can let you go, Mary, if you want.
Well, David has to go too. So
I genuinely have to go. I'm making use of. I need to go and see a relative who's in hospital.
Right. So, okay. So anyway, we saw that, but that's not good. Okay. Final thoughts then. Last thoughts on the election. On the last thoughts. Go ahead, David. You can do it.
Right. My last thoughts are: last night was marked a momentous, truly momentous event in recent Scottish political history. This is the end of a truly terrible period in Scottish politics and in Scottish life. We've been led by a group of incompetent, potentially criminal, genuinely unpleasant people who have done nothing for the good of Scottish life and Scottish people. They have taken us backwards. They've tried to introduce genuinely toxic elements into Scottish society, and I will hate them forever for that. And last night saw the beginning of the end of that awful period in our lives, and thank heavens, and well done to everybody who made it happen. Those are my thoughts.
That's very good. Do you want to leave that there, Mary? With that, it's quite a good ending there.
Yeah, okay.
Unless you've got a particular thought you want to do, Mark. Just quick thought from you.
Dave's covered it absolutely brilliantly. I think it's the beginning of the end. It's just a matter of time.
Right. Well, I'll leave you with some thoughts, kind of from Winston Churchill. It's not the end of the beginning, or even the beginning of the end. Nor is it very close to the end. In fact, it's the middle of the beginning of the end. So, like Winston, we must keep working towards victory and the end of toxic nationalism that has strangled Scotland's potential. We'd like to thank you all for your support for watching tonight. I've been here. My name's Mark Devlin. This is The Majority Show. I've been here with MaryDevlin, David Griffiths, and thank you to Mark Zegvelt for coming on. Well, I'm tired already. All right, so we'll see you again next Wednesday. So it's good night from me.
Good night, everyone, and thank you for your comments.
All right.
Good night, guys, and well done to everyone who made this possible.
Thank you, and thanks to the voters. That's it. All right, good night.